Mandalore will be yours, and Kenobi, this fifth pretender Dooku, and all our enemies will fall.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever episode of the Sons of Mandalore podcast. My name is Brian. You know me more on the various Destiny Discords as Cruisin', and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin. You want to introduce yourself to the people?
Yeah, hi guys. I'm happy to have you here. I am Justin. You might know me on the various Discords as Jimmy DeHand. I'm pretty mouthy on there.
Yep.
But
no one ever makes that confusion in person either. When you introduce yourself as Jimmy, and people just think that's your real name instead of Justin. But
never gets confusing. Never ever.
But all right. So let's just first off, I just want to say a big shout out and thank you to the Knights of Ren for helping us out and getting this up and running. Sugi particularly has been a lot of help to give me some ideas on how to get everything running, and they're obviously hosting this first podcast for us. And we got to meet them a couple times at a regional and at Worlds recently, and they're just a great group of guys, and they're great for the community. And I just wanted to give them a little shout out for hosting us here. So
yeah, definitely, they are super awesome, very very hospitable, very just welcome everybody in with open arms. They're great.
Yeah, I agree. They're one of the best things in my opinion to help grow the community. So with that in mind, I want to start off real quick with just a quick introduction into kind of who we are, like our background, how we got into Destiny, that kind of thing. So I'll kick it off. I used to play competitive Magic 12 years ago or so. I didn't stick with it for very long. I played through high school and college, and then I played a couple other games after that, and I didn't start picking up competitive games again until a couple years ago when I moved to the Nashville area and I discovered X-Wing. So I kind of got the FFG hook from that. I moved on to Imperial Assault. I'm checking out Legion now, but Destiny is definitely my one true love, as you could say. So I've been kind of focusing all of my competitive and casual, I guess, time into it. And so yeah, that's kind of a little bit about my background in gaming and Destiny in general. So what about you, Justin?
Yeah, I have a similar background. My Magic days go back a little further than yours. I got into the game way back with beta and
oh yeah, it's way before my time.
Arabian Nights, and yeah, but I sold out of that in the late '90s, so I haven't picked up a Magic card in a long time.
Okay, so you sold out of it about the time I started it.
Yeah, that sounds about right. But with the Fantasy Flight games, I have always loved, since I was a little kid, I've loved Star Wars. So as soon as I saw little X-Wings and TIE Fighters that I was able to make pew-pew noises with on the table, I had to have it.
Yep.
So, I got into X-Wing during their first couple of waves, and I've been playing FFG games ever since with the Star Wars theme. So naturally, I already had a bit of an inclination for card games, so when Destiny was announced, I fought it for about a week. And then the peer pressure got to me, and the after-school special moment where I, bought my first hit happened. And
I think I lasted a little bit longer than you. In fact, I believe you're the one who got me hooked. I resisted for months.
Yeah, I definitely was the pusher.
Yeah, I remember trying a game and being like, this seems kind of cool, but I don't really want to get that involved in a new game. And then the next week, you had me try another game with I forget what the deck it was. I want to say it was Django. Or something along those lines.
That sounds right.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, this is actually pretty fun. And then somebody else, you and maybe Chase at our local store, just gave me some free cards, and that
I remember sneaking a few dice cards into your bag of stuff. Yeah.
Yep. And as they say, yeah, you said it, the first hit is free, and here we are now.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that was also right during the Spirit of Rebellion drop, so I'm one of the few people who started playing during the shortage. It's a little bit of an anomaly there, but
yeah. That's dark times.
Yeah. We won't talk about that. All right, so now that's out of the way, let's get into the main topic we want to talk about today. So, we want to focus this first episode on deck building. It's a very broad topic, obviously, but with a new set coming out soon and a lot of people getting into the game recently, we actually have been working to grow our local community. And just this afternoon, we had a couple of our friends hitting us up on our Discord asking us like questions on decks they could build with their limited collections, starter decks, cheaper decks that are also competitive, that kind of thing, and just general deck building tips. And so we thought this would be a good place to start. Justin, I probably would admit, is a little bit of a better deck builder than I am. So let's just talk about kind of where you start, Justin, when you go to build a deck of whatever it is, whether it be for a competitive or elsewhere.
Well, I mean, when I start my deck building, the first thing that I really hone in on is where do I want to go with the deck? How do I want to win my games? Do I want to win via damage? Do I want to win via mill? Do I want to kind of control the opponent, or do I want to just hard, damage or hard mill? Those are the things to keep in mind when you first sit down looking at your available cards. Once you've settled on that, the next thing you got to move on to is the character pairings, because that's the core of where your deck draws its, oomph. It's like how you win the game. So if you decide, say, on a damage deck, you need to go, okay, how am I going to deal this damage? I'm going to deal range damage. Am I going to deal indirect damage? Which, that's a viable option now with these trilogy decks.
Yeah, definitely.
The range damage is the three main components. Look at your characters that offer those strengths. Look at your characters that offer the colors of cards that will open up to you for that. And, use that to build out your 30-point list. Now, if you look at some of the popular decks nowadays, like at the start of the Legacies meta, no one was playing Boba Seventh Sister. And then all of a sudden, you heard about this one regional in, I think it was Tampa.
Yeah, where like 14 people brought it or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the people who played against are like, whoa, wait a second.
I remember listening to that exact podcast. Actually, it was Knights of Ren podcast where they were talking about it. And I heard them, and I was literally in my car driving to work that day, and I thought to myself, that sounds like a terrible deck. Why would so many people bring that?
Yeah.
And here we are.
But then, like, when you start to really look at it, you go, okay, Boba has 2 mixed damage sides, and then a special for essentially a third type of damage. It's like, that sounds super slow. That sounds, crazy. But then you go, well, wait a second. Seven Sister Elite brings 3 dice to the table. Boba brings 2 dice to the table. You've got some focus. You got a lot of melee. You got blue, which is hands down the best color in the game.
Turns out blue's pretty good.
It's pretty good. So when you start looking at all the individual components, you go, wow, that's pretty great. But for the first month or two of the meta, no one even thought about it. They're like, oh, let's try Boba with Phasma. That's the obvious pairing. It was fine. It's fast damage, very aggro-y, but red has never been great on certain, deck building things. It's good as a splash color, but it's not good as a main.
Yeah,
course.
I mean, it's still been a pretty successful deck overall. But yeah, I would obviously argue that I think that Boba 7th is just better. But I think that it's an important point is that just don't be afraid to experiment in general. Like when the meta first started, somebody won a regional with Poe Hondo, and everyone was playing that deck. I remember the regional we went to right after that. It was probably 40% of the field, and
various pairings of Hondo. Either Yoda or Poe.
Yeah, Yoda was there, much less represented, but he was definitely there, and it's still a good deck. But you don't see Poe Hondo, winning any big events anymore. Yoda Hondo is still very powerful, obviously, but
sure. Yeah.
There's especially anytime a new set comes out, especially now, there's so many sets out there. There's just so many possibilities of things you can try, and that's kind of a point I wanted to bring up too about if you have a smaller collection. Chances are, especially if you bought the 2-player starter, if you bought the 2-player starter, you have the majority of some tier 1 decks right there. The cards in that set are extremely powerful.
Even with all the new Legacies cards, R2-P2 is still really good.
Oh yeah.
Now, your deck might not have all the Ancients and Shotos and everything in it, but you can still make a really competitive deck with just the Heirlooms, the Pose Blaster, the cards that come with the two-player set, and a couple of other starters, and you can have a deck that can compete. You might not win tournaments, but you will definitely, you know, be pushing for that top spot. Now, I mean, once you've decided your damage type and the style of deck you're going for, though, you'd really need to start working on those character pairings. The points, I mean, you only have 30 to play with, and you think that's a lot until you start getting down to kind of like designing, where you go, okay, certain characters run in that kind of low to mid range, like, you know, 10 to 14 or so elite. Then you've got the higher ends that are like 16, 17 for elites, and then the really elite characters are up to 20-some points. So the first thing I look for is how many dice can I put on the table when I put my pairing together. And I used to, I mean, back during like the Awakenings days and a little bit of the Spirit of Rebellion days, 3 die starts were not that uncommon and were marginally effective. Daddy Vader was a good damage dealer. He won the first Worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a testament to, as the card pool grows, you know, things just naturally become more powerful. There used to be dead card slots in every deck, and therefore things were just a little bit slower and not as powerful. And, you know, now you need those extra dice to
and that's the thing. It's like, now when I look at a deck option, if I don't have 4 dice on the board at the start of the game, I know that I was like, okay, how do I fix this? What do I need to do to get?
Now, I will say there are
characters,
maybe some minor exceptions. For example, Rainbow Mill is a 3-die start, and some will argue that is not the most powerful of the Mill variations, but it has been pretty successful at some big events, so, you know, it's hard to argue that it's a bad deck. And so, but, you know, that's obviously an exception because it doesn't rely as much on its dice as much as it does, you know, shields and surviving and various events and things that mill cards. But yeah, I just wanted to point out that exception. For the vast majority of cases, yeah, you want at least 4 dice in your character pairing for sure.
And if you can fit a 5th die in somehow, either through Seven Sister and her bringing the ID9 Seeker Droid, or if you can have a lot of lower cost characters like the original Ezra Bridger and Rose and that sort of thing, bring in a 7 cost character, you can get a 5 die start, which is great. But you also have to look at, once again, how you are winning the game. Those character dice in that 5 die start aren't there to deal the damage. They're there to facilitate you getting out your vehicles, to changing the board state so you have this overwhelming number of dice after you've activated your 3 or 4 supports.
Right.
Meanwhile, Boba 7th, that damage is coming from character dice and a couple of upgrades that you put on there. A single Maul Saber, a single Ancient, a Vibro Knife. Those sorts of things are what you're fueling your damage pool with. So the tactics and style, which brings me to my next point, when you start designing these decks, you need, and this only comes through testing, through playing the game and feeling out what you're good at and what you like. If you like that slow build-up, a vehicle deck might be for you. If you like a really fast, hard-hitting aggro deck, you know, Sabine Ezra might be your thing.
Yep.
If you want like a slow ramp, you know, play it a little defensive, get a feel for the board state, maybe like a Rey Ayla deck might be your speed.
Sure. And you can, if you're new to the game, you can kind of gauge these things if you've played other games in the past. I'm sure you have an idea of what your playstyle has been in other games. If you're, you know, a control player in Magic, you might go more for either that type of slow vehicle deck or like my personal preference is I like things that give me as much control as possible, like Thrawn is one of my favorite characters both in Star Wars and in Destiny. And so, like, you can use, if you don't know where to start, you can use your preferences from other games to kind of give you an idea of what playstyle you like, and use the examples Justin just gave you, or ask people around your local area, like, hey, this is kind of deck I usually like to play. Any suggestions for characters, things like that, and that will definitely give you a good launching point to start playing around with things like that.
Yeah, and then once you've decided on your character pairings, you've got your lineup set. Then you need to move on. Now, I mean, everyone's a little different. I tend to build from the dice cards down. When I get my character pairings, the next thing I do is I pull up the upgrade list and I go, okay, what works in my deck?
Yep.
If I'm running a melee deck, what melee weapons do I need to bring? What color pairings do I have going? If I can't bring red, then it's like, okay, I'm down to just yellow and blue. Start picking the most impactful dice cards and then go to the secondary stuff. If you're ramping with vehicles, you might not bring a single upgrade.
Yep.
Or maybe one or two. Like, maybe not even any dice upgrades.
Yeah, sure.
But if you're running a full-on melee deck, you're going to want the heirlooms, you're going to want the ancients, you're going to want the shodos, you're going to want, stuff to help facilitate your win through those character dice with the upgrade option. But one thing to keep in mind is that as the dice pool grows, we've got another set coming soon. We've already got, 4 or 5 sets under the belt.
Yep.
2-player starter, rivals set, the 4 different individual starters. There's a lot of cards out there. So you can't pick every melee weapon you see. Your deck would be 30 upgrades, no events, no supports, and you get blown off the table.
Right. That's why most of my deck building, I start with like 54 cards, and I'm trying to figure out what the heck I can cut, because I just want everything.
Now, I design from a little different point of view. I tend to like to keep my decks in that 10 to 12 upgrade range.
Sure.
I'll make some exceptions for certain cards like Force Illusion, because they're not as expensive, they're not dice cards.
Right.
But I like that sweet spot of like...
Yeah. A lot of ways,
12-ish
Force Illusion
upgrades.
is almost a removal card.
Yeah, it's almost control with how
Right.
much you can prevent with the ability there. But when I'm looking at those options, and as a good example, I play a lot of Ray Ayla. My list has, the standards. I have some heirlooms, I have the shodos, I have the ancients. So there's, 6 cards already. From that point, I build out and flesh out what I want from there. 2 Force Illusions, then I put in my instance, I like for the mirror to have my handcrafted light bows, and then I splash in like a Ray's lightsaber and a Obi saber, and by the time I'm done, I'm like, okay, I'm good. There's 2 or 3 other upgrades that I would like to include sometimes, but I don't because I can't afford to play them. They take up very vital event card slots and support card slots. So, when you're building, be conservative. You can always go back and tweak it later.
Yep.
But
yeah, I think the key there is that you want as much of you want a balance, right? The goal is it's because Destiny is a game where you just bring one deck to an event. You have to kind of be prepared for anything. So you need to keep in mind while you're building you need to balance your deck. You need to have some removal. You need to have some events that either remove dice or heal you or block damage or something along those lines. You need events that move your game plan forward, whether it be aggro, you need like a lightsaber throw or something along those lines, and then the upgrades that you use to actually deal your damage or mill your cards, whatever your chosen win condition is. Like you kind of have to be able to react to whatever sits down across from you. So you can't go completely all in on one type of card or one strategy. Excuse me, not strategy. One mindset. You need to be able to react to if your opponent's playing mill. You want to avoid just having an auto loss as much as possible. So
sure,
that kind of comes into the concept is like you want somewhere in the range of 10 upgrades, like 7 to 10 removal cards, and these are obviously just numbers that to give you an idea, and it can greatly vary from deck to deck, but
a lot of that also changes based on your playstyle. There are certain decks out there that I'm not good at running that run like 3 or 4 removal cards.
Yes. I mean, standard hero vehicles, I think, has 4 or 5, maybe?
Exactly. And it's not that they're bad decks. It's not. I mean, it's just when I pilot a deck, I like to have removal options available, like something in the back pocket that if I need to, I've got something to try and get me out of a bind.
Yep.
Those vehicle decks, the moment that the game starts, the whole goal is to get vehicles on the board, extra dice on the board, roll out, make just a tidal wave of damage coming at your opponent. And the timer is the health on those 3 characters. You want to keep your Ezra alive, you want to keep your Rose alive, you want to, use Ayla to distract and fix dice as long as she's alive. The purpose of a deck that is more like, especially 2-character decks, you don't have that luxury of the time with the health of the characters. You need to really kind of focus on, like, all right, how do I prevent damage each round?
Yep.
Like, what can I do to stop damage each round? So there's no hard and fast rule of deck buildings. Like, you need 8+ removal cards. You and I, we tend to play that way.
Sure.
But if
much
you
to your
find
dismay.
Exactly. You've had decks with like 14+ before, right?
Yeah, I have a trilogy mill deck that's Yoda, Jedha Parson, and Elite Jar Jar. And I think that deck has 16 control cards or something along those lines. But that's an extreme example because, in a format like that, well, A, Trilogy has a smaller card pool, and B, in a mill deck like that, you have a certain number of cards that help you, churn the mill, like burn through their deck, and the only thing you care about after that is surviving. So, there's a lot more room for those removal cards in a deck like that. There isn't something else.
Sure.
But I think the important point is, like, once you know what you want to do, your character pairing, and you get a reasonable balance, like, just go play some games. You don't have to worry about having the perfect deck the first time you sit down to play. As you play, just pay attention to the cards you're using. Oftentimes when I'm, like, preparing for a tournament, I have a trick I do where I take a slip of paper, like, say I'm debating between 2 cards, I'll put a slip of paper in the sleeve that has the name of the other card on it, and I'll think to myself when I draw the card, would I rather have this other card? Or even if you don't know at all what you want to put in that spot, if this card is on the cutting board, you're not sure if you're going to keep it, that will be a reminder for you every time you draw it to say, have I actually used this card, or do I just end up discarding it to reroll every time I draw it? And that'll give you an idea, what's working, what's not. Maybe I can make some tweaks and make my deck better. And it's kind of it's an evolving process. You're never going to sit down and build the perfect deck,
And those testing tricks, that's a good point to bring up, because I'll think to myself, it's like, all right, from game to game, what is the card that I discard to reroll with the most?
Yep.
And if I find that every single game I'm discarding a certain card to reroll with it, it's like, why is that in the deck if the only thing I'm using it for is a reroll? Rerolling is important, but I want my this sounds weird. I want each time that I decide that I need to discard to reroll for it to be a hard decision for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I want those cards to be impactful. I want all 30 cards to be impactful.
The idea is that you have cards that can do different things, and you just discard the one that's least important in the situation you're in, right?
Yeah.
So a good example of that was when you were preparing with your Rey Ayla deck, you tried Decisive Blow for a long time, and after, I don't know, a week or two of practicing, we realized you never used that card. I think you used it once or twice in like the 40 games or something that we tested. And so, you know, it works for a lot of people. It just didn't work for your play style, so it didn't make the cut.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where I'm very aggressive with my money when it comes to control. Like, if I have one resource, I will gladly spend it on overconfidence or something along those lines.
It's one of my favorite
cards.
It is
a great card. But because of that play style that I like, I never had those 3 resources to spend on Decisive Blow. Yep. So, you know, like you said, I mean, yeah, one time it won me the game, and 3 other times I discarded it to reroll, and, you know, that's useful, but it's not...
Yep.
It's not winning me most of my games.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel happy with the change that I made with it, where I took it out, definitely. Yeah. But, you know, like you said, everyone has their own play style. So testing playing the deck into the ground. I don't want to say that because people get bored of certain decks after a while. But, definitely stick with, and if you're practicing for something like a Sword Championship or, a Galactic Qualifier, those sorts of things, play your deck a lot. Don't just build it, try it a couple times, like, oh, this works, it should be good.
Yeah.
You don't know the field, you don't know what you're going to be going against, you don't know how your deck responds to certain stresses, certain opponents.
Exactly.
Now, one thing I did want to touch on was your character pairings. It's not just the dice and the effect that they bring. Another thing to keep in mind is that your whole health counter is based on the characters you run. So if you have, a good example is back in Awakenings, there was Django Veers. Really potent, impactful characters. Django had 10 health, Veers had 9 health. Mm-hmm. So you burned real bright, and you burned out real quick. Because, 19 damage is nothing these days.
Absolutely. And that wasn't always the case, but...
Sure.
But yeah, now health pool is definitely a very important thing. I remember when I first started, I had a really limited collection, and the only deck I was able to make was Asajj Dooku. And I think that also has 19 health, because Asajj is criminally has
overpriced and underpowered.
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the first lessons I learned, is how important your health pool is, because there were a lot of games where, I would just be able to control enough and eke out the win, but for the most part, Asajj died turn 1,
top of turn 2,
or round 1, top of round 2, and so losing a character that early obviously is a huge blow to most decks. So it's just definitely something that you want to keep in mind.
Yeah, and as always, play what works for you.
Yeah,
but
of course.
A good rule of thumb is I need at least 21 health on the board when I'm building my pairing.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's just me.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, everyone has different tastes, but that's a reasonable number to shoot for. There's a lot of character combinations that fit that.
Yeah, and I've noticed as new sets come out, and I guess the power creep as more things get introduced, you're looking at health pools that are growing a little bit. Now it's not uncommon.
About 12 health characters in this set coming up.
Yeah, the new set coming out has really upped the game on some of those health pools. So, 2 character pairing that has 22, 23 health is going to be very easy to do.
Yeah, for sure.
So, as the game progresses, I hate to say it, but some of these Awakenings cards that are released, like Veers is a good example. He's got a great die, but he's got 9 health and an ability that is not usable enough in the decks that he fits in. Yep. So, maybe you need to put him in the binder and reach for,
it's a collector card.
Some of these. Yeah.
That's the collectible part of the CCG. Collectible part of the CCG. All right, so I have one more thing I want to touch on real quick. I want to get your thoughts on this, because I feel like we have slightly different, maybe similar, but slightly different points of view on this, and it's something I see in a lot of deck lists that people post now. What are your thoughts on one-ofs as opposed to having 15 cards with 2 copies of each?
I am of the opinion that the card pool is so large right now that there are about 50 effective cards for 30 slots. Mm-hmm. So when I'm building a deck, I'll look at what am I trying to achieve with each card. And is the cost to effect ratio, not to sound too nerdy about this, but is that enough to warrant bringing 2 copies of it? Certain cards that you and I love, like Overconfidence, I'll bring 2 of those every time. Certain cards that are very important to me having at least 1 copy on the board, like Shoto Lightsaber or Ancient Lightsaber, I'll bring 2 copies of those. But if I'm splashing in something that in certain games can be game-changing, but in other games it's just kind of useful, like a good example for my Rey Ayla deck is Obi-Wan's Lightsaber. Mm-hmm. That unblockable special is great in certain matchups, and in others it's okay, it works, it's a lightsaber, it's fine.
Sure.
But, I will only run 1 of those.
Plus it's unique, in the deck. So there's something to that as well.
Yeah, and that's another thing to kind of keep in mind, especially with cards like Lightsaber Pull available. Pulling any blue weapon from your library is a great you know, it's essentially an extra copy of whatever lightsaber you're looking for.
Sure.
So.
Yep. Yeah, I agree that and that's one like I see a lot of people running two of as well. Like if your deck is built around needing a specific upgrade,
it's like if your win condition involves pulling Maul's lightsaber and playing it,
right?
Then
yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with you for the most part. I'm on a slightly different wavelength, I think, in that like as it is, Destiny is a card game, of course, but it's also a dice game. And I think a lot of the skill in this game is kind of maintaining the consistency, adapting to whatever the board state is. You know, if you get a bad roll, you know, you have to adjust and figure out ways to improve it. And another form of consistency is the cards in your deck. And that's one of the most important things to me personally when I'm building a deck or playing a deck is trying to make it as consistent as possible. So I try to I do some one-ups, don't get me wrong, you know, for those fringe cases like we were talking about, if there's certain types of removal that are really good in one matchup, but maybe not as good in others. Sometimes I'll kind of just do one of those, but for the most part, I like try to force myself to make the tough decision and figure out which one of these is the better choice for my deck and that I will want more often. And so I have a lot of decks where I have 14 cards that are two ofs and only 2 cards that are one of each, because that's just kind of my style. I want to know every game I play, it's a 30-card deck. I know almost exactly what I'm going to get. And that's probably a big reason that I like Thrawn Talzin in the first place, because the whole deck is based around guaranteeing max damage. You use Thrawn to get rid of removal, you use his focus and Talzin's ability to flip your dice to whatever you want, and I also play the version that doesn't run chance cubes because I hate the thought of flipping over that 0 at the wrong time. And you know, there's some argument. I can hear you laughing in the background. There's some argument to be made there about whether or not that's the right choice.
You have a bit of like a confirmation bias thing going on with that. Like
100%.
We'll play 50 practice games, and you'll pull that 0 cost card like 3 times, and you're like, I'm done with this. I'm taking these out of the deck.
This lost me the game.
Mind. Yeah,
I remember saying that exact word, something like, I can't go to Worlds and lose a game because of this, which is just ridiculous. Like,
never mind the fact that you might win 5 games off the extra resources.
Right, by the fact that I can get a Rise again off, you know, round 2. So, and well, I guess that just goes into more. There's a whole other topic there about confirmation bias and tilting and all of that that we'll get into in a future episode. But, so I guess my only point is it's up to your flavor, just like everything else. You know, like if you care more about that consistency, do more 2-ups. But there's nothing wrong with, you know, there are some really good decks out there that have like 10 cards that are 1-ups, and it's more of like a toolbox thing, right? Where you have a lot of answers to different situations, and you know, 30-card deck is just small enough that can work.
Yeah, and one last thing on it, it's just the securing of a certain card or two in your opening hand with your mulligan, that sort of thing. You like having 2-ofs is great, but there's certain cards in a deck where I don't want them the first turn or 2. I want them turn 3 or 4.
Sure.
Rise Again's a great example. And those are the cards that I tend to like having 1-ofs, because I know that if I throw it back with my mulligan, I might not draw it again, and if I do, I know it's going to come later in the game when it's going to be way more impactful.
We both know every time you throw a card back from a mulligan, you immediately draw it again.
Redraw it, yeah. But, you know, it's one of those things where when I'm designing and I go, okay, I don't want this the first couple turns, I want to hit this later, like a hyperspace jump or Rise Again, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Those are my 1-ups. Now, if I'm running a deck that requires hyperspace jump, I normally have 2 just because it's so impactful.
Sure.
But like Rise Again might be one of those cards that I might go down to 1 of. Caution's another example that I've been kind of weighing going down to 1 of, because it's a card that's great on certain moments, and then other moments it's okay. And you know,
it's just so good when it's, you know,
it is. It's the change of the change of the board state. Like when we talk about control, it's like for 1 die you get 3 shields. You know, can.
Isn't it funny how not that long ago, Caution was a dead card because Vibro Knife existed? and now it's like one of the best cards.
Yeah, but it's also one of those things where when I am cutting cards and I'm making those tough decisions, going down to a one of isn't always the worst fate, because I've where I want it to play. It's just one of the things that I kind of think about when I'm building these decks and going down, putting all the great cards in there. Like you said, you end up with like a list of like 60 cards. You got to make those cuts to get down to the legal playable deck.
And if having a bunch of one-ofs at the start can help you make the decisions on which cards you want to keep when you're playtesting. So yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, I think that about wraps it up for today's episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We had a good time, and I hope you did too. We're definitely going to be producing some more of these episodes every few weeks or so. So be sure to keep a lookout for those. You can find us at our site at thesonsofmandalore.com. We have a full page there with all of the Way of the Force spoilers that you can take a look at in image form, all put in one place. And of course, you can find all of our podcasts and articles there as well. You can find us on Facebook as well, and of course on iTunes or Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you can, be sure to just leave us an iTunes review. It really helps us out. People find the podcast easier that way when we get some good reviews. And if you have any feedback, feel free to just let us know through our webpage as well. And I think that's about it. I want to thank again the Knights of Ren for everything in helping us get this set up and hosting our first episode for them. Can't thank them enough. They've been really great. Let's see, anything else you want to say to the people before we end it?
No, like you said, just I appreciate everyone tuning in. Really appreciate Knights of Ren for giving us the opportunity, and come check us out. We got a lot more content coming your guys' way soon.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much. All right, and we'll see you guys next time.
Yep, see you guys.
Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join us on all of our social media outlets. And a big thank you to all of our Patreons for your support. We can't do this without your help, so make sure to join us for all of our exclusive Knights of Ren content.